So let's move on to Christian and Frederik, who I've just likened to the Anton Deck of the cannabis industry. So they're both from Mile High. Originally from Denmark, Frederik and Christian Hendriksen achieved master's degrees in finance from Copenhagen Business School before setting out and starting up finance-related ventures internationally. In 2011, the brothers were part of Groupon's international expansion into Japan and China, which at the time was the fastest growing company in the world. Following Groupon, they were part of setting up a venture capitalist fund in Zambia, investing in mining-related startups before they both ended up in London. Frederik spent 5 years at Morgan Stanley doing equity trading and M&A, while that nearly sounded like MMA, so I had you down as a wrestler there for a moment, whilst Christian worked for Citigroup and then UBS, where he was part of building a new multi-asset focused team. Frederik and Christian resigned from their banking jobs early this year to join Mile High Labs, the world's leading CBD extractor. As co-heads of international expansion, they are responsible for building and managing sales and operations for all non-US markets. Working closely with the Belfast-based managing director John Wellis, they are driving the development of internationally renowned business, which is fast becoming recognized as the leader in its field. The company's stance on regulation, consumer protection, and customer service is gaining admirers both across and outside the industry. They are particularly engaged on the issue of future-proofing the business, both in its practices and customer perception. Mile High is leading the way on ensuring compliance within the current regulatory framework. The company is also investing heavily in R&D, working closely with a range of top universities to ensure high standards of consumer safety and developing a range of new products. Mile High Labs' online presence is already winning awards, whilst the company also recently won the coveted World CBD Awards for Product Safety Award. Well, we'll see if they win anything this evening at the Hemp and CBD Awards. There's an aspiration to move on to. Ladies and gentlemen, can I introduce to you, please, Christian and Frederik Hendriksen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob.
Nice and concise intro.
Yeah, like that. Thank you for having us. I'm Frederik. This is Christian. We're from Mile High Labs. We're here to talk about how to future-proof your CBD business. We're going to go through some of our learnings over the last years and try to focus on, how that can be relevant for hopefully some of your businesses. But before we do that, just a little bit about us. As Rob mentioned, Mile High is one of the largest extractors in the world. So we extract CBD in the US and distribute it across the world, and we do private label as well. And I'm not going to dwell too much on my background. I think Rob covered it pretty extensively, but spent the last years in finance, and prior to jumping over here, was working with the now CFO of Mile High Labs in the US, Jonathan Hilly. And that's how went from finance to getting involved with the CBD about a year ago. And first heard of the industry about sort of say 1.5 years ago. Started learning about what CBD was, and it quite quickly became apparent that it's a big opportunity globally. And Mile High Labs raised $35 million in November last year. And as that money was being raised, started to pull together a team of people with various backgrounds, so finance and entrepreneurship such as Christian and I, but also experts in law, in supply chain, from pharma, which means that we have a pretty deep bench now of talent from various different industries that have all come together at Mile High in both the US and Europe. And a little bit about the company before we jump into the presentation. Founded in 2016. As it says here, record-setting funding in terms of our 35 million. We've since raised another 65 debts, so we've raised $100 million since November last year. You can see on the small map down below that in terms of our European operations, we've got distribution and operations out of Belfast, and we've got sales and marketing in London, where I'm based along with Christian. We unveiled earlier this year the Mile-High Monster that some of you may have heard of, which is one of the largest extraction facilities in the world. It's on wheels and can process 50 acres of hemp a day. And in June this year, we acquired a 400,000 square foot old Novartis, the Swiss pharmaceutical company, acquired an old facility that they used to produce pills in the US market that we're now using for private label, so expanding fast into the private label space. And in terms of compliance, we are ISO 9001, we're GMP certified. We'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, but yeah, that's about us for now. So we can jump to the topic of the talk.
Yeah, so for today's presentation, we were asked to speak about how to future-proof your CBD business, which is obviously a big topic. And the way we've gone about that is looking through some of the learnings we've had along the way, going from essentially a one-man show back in 2016 when we were founded, to now being more than 200 employees. The picture you'll see in the middle here on the slide is the Mile-High Monster, and that's, you can say, the piece of equipment that sets us apart. It's our extraction facility that can go through 50 acres of hemp a day. And it's really, you can say, the vision around how that was developed that took us to being that large-scale producer we are today. So going through, from a one-person show to where we are now, we've obviously had some key learnings, and that's what we will address on the next slide. So if you don't mind changing. So we've tried to say, if there's one slide you should remember from today, hopefully it will be this from our presentation. We've tried to obviously simplify it a lot when you need to boil down what have you learned and what's central into one single slide and a single presentation. But we tried to go into these 5 pillars to say what's important to build a CBD brand. If we start with products, needless to say, you need to think about what products to offer today versus what products you need to offer in the future. And that's important because we're in an industry that's evolving so quickly as it is. And therefore, think about, if you look compared to the US, they generally have more advanced products. They're probably a couple of years ahead of us in terms of product offerings. So seek inspiration and figure out where you should move to. The second pillar is scalability. As Freddie mentioned, we've acquired a massive facility. I'm not saying that everyone should do that, but you need to think about how do you actually meet the demand of from your customers. We are in a quite unique industry, all of us, because we're essentially seeing growth rates similar to tech startups, but we're delivering a physical product. And that means that we need to be able to cope with the scale, the delivery, that also ties into the 4th pillar, logistics. We need to be able to develop ways of getting products to consumers and throughout our supply chain that can meet this extreme growth that the industry is expecting. The central one is regulatory and compliance, and that's probably the one topic that's mentioned in all presentations here today for a very good reason. Regulatory compliance is at the center of our industry, which is natural, but what we're really encouraging is to look to other industries and see what they have to do. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. Let's look at other consumer goods industries and see what they have done and what they live up to, and then try to adhere to the same standards. And then the last and 5th pillar is reputation. And here, we are working in an industry that is under scrutiny, so let's make sure that we all work together in order to make this into an industry that can actually last. So with that, we'll go into each of these individual pillars in slightly more detail.
So the first point, is this on? Do you hear me? Okay, now it's back on. First point, products, know what products to offer today, but also in the future. As Christian mentioned, we're taking our background in sort of the journey we've gone on, and hopefully, there'll be some examples here for you to think about and some food for thought. So around 6 months ago, we were only an isolate extractor. So we had really one product, and isolate in the US is still the key ingredient, the key bulk ingredient today. But we've been forced to, we have as a result of customer demand, developed a whole range of bulk products now. So we now also have THC-free distillate, a big product for the European market, and we have water solubles of both for the drinks industry. So obviously also highlighting that there's so many different applications of CBD and what you can do with it, that we need to deliver or develop a broader range of products. And what happened then was that I mentioned that we are ISO 9001 and we're GMP certified. We had customers come to us and say, you deliver a quality ingredient, can you do that in a finished product as well? So like develop a private label arm. And that was really what led us to then go out and investigate, what can we do private label wise to also do a quality service. And we ended up acquiring this pharmaceutical facility to build quality consumer products as well that we can offer private label. And I think the point here is really that, there are two things that are driving what products you'll be offering. For any industry, it should hopefully be consumer demand. So what are customers after? And right now, the industry is trying to figure out which products do you really want CBD in. There are people doing gummies, there are people doing soft gels, people doing topicals, et cetera, which ones will be the most efficient, both from a bioavailability standpoint, but also from a compliance standpoint. And I think that's the second point about what products to offer in our space, is that regulation pretty uniquely is the key driver of which products you should be offering. So for instance, if you look at in the US, we're now waiting for FDA guidance on which categories can you do and you can't do. So it seems like we will get topicals appears to be one of the ones that people will likely go for, whereas the whole ingestible space, similar to Europe with novel food, is still more complicated. So really the example here being, make sure that you are ready to adapt both with customer demand, but also, regulation will undoubtedly change the path of which products we'll be offering. And then on to the point of scalability. I mentioned it already, but obviously, like you can see, it's a pretty big factory, it's 400,000 square foot, and obviously scalability, everyone will talk about scalability, and you will think about, scalability is all fine. Of course, I want to build a scalable business, but I think to Christian's point earlier about we are in an industry that grows a bit like tech startups, but we're delivering a physical product. You need to remember, how do I also grow if I hit my growth targets or far exceed them? How do I grow my manufacturing as well? Whether you are doing a consumer product or whether you are in the extraction business as we are. Because one thing is, buying new machinery, growing faster, but you also need to keep regulation in mind. So for instance, if you want to be GMP certified, if you want to be ISO certified, any other certification process, every time you do a new step in that process, you'll need to be recertified or work with the certification agencies to maintain that. So a lot of planning is required if you want to build a scalable business.
Yes. That takes us on to the third pillar of regulation and compliance. And here, if we zoom out, the reason why this is such an important topic for our industries is really consumer safety. Therefore, I think we should always look at compliance as not something bad, or regulation something bad. It's simply something we need to adhere to ensure that consumers are delivered a safe product. And here you can say what we have done and what we have been fortunate as a company is we really early on started that process and said, if CBD is to become this X billion dollar industry that people expect, well, some that needs to deliver a product that's consistent and in large quantities, but where you have traceability throughout the supply chain. And that's where terminologies like GMP and ISO are really key. i.e. you need to be able to demonstrate how do you produce the product. If something goes wrong along the production line, how do you ensure that there's accounted for and you have a system in place for everything you do. And that's why you can say, for us, it was the certification process. I encourage all of you in your businesses to figure out, either whether it's you're supplying an e-commerce product, whether you are doing a white label, or you're producing everything in-house. Just figure out, how do I ensure that I deliver a safe product to consumers. The other aspect of regulation obviously then comes to sort of food safety, and that's where we in Europe obviously need to take into consideration novel foods. And the way we look at novel foods is, again, it's a regulation that was put in place to protect European consumers from new foods being introduced into this space. And that's why we as a company feel like, well, that's obviously something we need to adhere to, and we're in the process of filing a novel food application. And in this room, I know that there are definitely differences of opinion of whether CBD is indeed novel or not, but that's not really the point. The point is, we should adhere to the law, and if we are an industry that wants to stay, we obviously need to be compliant with these aspects. So in this whole space, I can really only encourage people to seek legal advice. And the issue is that we are in an under-regulated industry, as in we need more clarity as to what are really the rules and what should the rules be going forward. And that, we see it as a company both in the States and here in Europe. So we are actually working towards and hope that we'll get more clarity from regulators so we know that what we're doing is safe, because what it comes down to is really consumer protection.
All right. To the point on regulation, you can say, like, in terms of also hopefully giving a few points that are worth thinking about today. We are under extreme scrutiny, as Christian is saying, as an industry because of the space we are in. But you can also try to take some of these things and turn it around to your advantage, which we've, for instance, done on our supply chain in terms of thinking, what steps can we take to guarantee we deliver as safe as product as possible, and our customers, so that being manufacturers of, for instance, vape liquids or other consumer products, that they receive a quality product from us. So we've developed a pretty unique supply chain. Our COO is here today, so he's over at our stand over there. I'm very happy to talk about supply chain and blockchain if anyone wants to discuss that. But to give you a quick run through of what we've done is, when we sell, say, a kilo of isolate, we now deliver it in an aluminum container with a plastic lid and a cap on top that's a bit like a can of Coke. So if you open that, you cannot put it back on, meaning that no one from when, for instance, our isolate leaves our factory and it's GMP certified, until it reaches the final intended customer, we can guarantee that it hasn't been tampered with along the way. We've also got heating sensors in it, we've got humidity sensors, and we've got a GPS tracker. So we can demonstrate from a product has been finally produced till it reaches the customer, it hasn't been tampered with, and we can see exactly where it's been. And then similarly to that, on these aluminum containers, we've got a QR code that you can scan with your phone, and you'll jump straight to our client portal that you can see there on the right. That will give you certificate of analysis, it'll give you safety data sheet, and it'll give you which farm your product came from, etc., which day it was manufactured, all to create more transparency in an industry that needs as much transparency as possible. And what we are now getting requests for when we do our private label products is, for instance, to put this QR code on a finished consumer product. So if you, as a brand, want to deliver a quality product and want to convince the customers, where we probably have quite a few skeptical customers in this space because they don't know if they can trust what it says on a label. If they have a QR code on a finished product, we're starting to see this in the US, and they can scan it, they can jump directly to a certificate of analysis telling them exactly the contents of the product they're buying, which is obviously extremely important, for instance, if you're an athlete and need to know that you don't get, with THC content, et cetera, et cetera. So again, an example of how you can try to, use some of these challenges that we have in this industry and turn them around to hopefully be also an advantage to your business.
Yes, and this takes us to the last slide of the presentation, which is the reputation pillar we talked about. And here, really, we just, as we both mentioned now in the presentation, it's we are in an industry under scrutiny, and that's to do with the crop we're using to produce our products. But it's also to do with just sort of the industry overall, where it's, there's a perception that there are too many people around that don't know what they're doing or don't have consumers' best interests at heart. And therefore, what we are trying to do with everything at Mile High, and what I would encourage everything to do, is really be wider than white in everything you do. It's important for any company, it's specifically important to our industry, because we are under scrutiny, and therefore we need to ensure that not only we do what we say we do, but we need to do it better than everyone else. And that means small things: pay your bills on time, be a company that people want to work for, have values, set core values, and make sure you live up to them. And it's really not things that are unnatural to any other industry. It's just something that we need to be extra careful of as an industry, because there are there's a lot of bad reputation going on at the moment, and obviously we need to address that for the really full potential of our industry to materialize. So with that, just to sum it up quickly, we went through the 5 different pillars of what we think are the key reasons, and it's I hope the examples of what we have gone through and our line of thinking for how to address that has been somewhat useful in giving at least some thoughts around what does it take to be a future-proof CBD business. Happy to take any questions now.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. One thing that struck me during that is I was a Royal Military Policeman for years, and the motto of my regiment was Exemplo Ducamus, which means lead by example. And I think that's something that Mile High are clearly doing, and you have aspirations to do that for the entire industry. And there are lessons to be learned, I think, from lots of individual companies to do that. Setting high standards and ensuring that you stick to those standards is absolutely critical. And the small things, that's one of the things I picked up on about like paying your bills on time. Those are the things that send clear messages out in the marketplace. Ladies and gentlemen, are there any questions?
Hi. In terms of novel food approval, why do you think that the isolate has not been accepted so far in food and drink?
Do you want to?
Yes, it's really CBD concentrates in any form, not isolate specifically. So it's the way to really... Sorry?
My understanding is that the distillate is okay and has already been through novel food approval for food and beverages, but the isolate has not?
No, we consider that a common misconception, really. So it's really, if it's a brilliant example of how the language around the legislation of this is quite vague, but the interpretation we follow is that any product where the CBD concentration is higher than what it's found in nature would make it novel in essence. And therefore, if you go for hemp seed oil, it's not novel because that's the natural occurrence, but anything that goes through a process will be novel. And again, I think it's important to zoom out and say, well, like, what's the reason why it's considered that? And it's because it hasn't been consumed in that format in Europe before '97. So, it's just the European regulation around what is a new food to European consumers. Like, my girlfriend worked for a dairy company for a number of years, and they, every time they bring a new yogurt to market, they will go through a novel food application. So, for any other food industry, it's a completely standard process. And that's why, we should really look at our industry and say, well, why should we be any different? Of course, we want to protect consumers, so let's follow the guidelines, try to understand them, and then follow them.
It's an interesting debate which could rage on forever with regards to novel foods. I think that some of the bigger trade bodies, we all agree on isolate being novel because there is no history of consumption prior to 1997. Everybody accepts that, so that's why isolate is sat out there. The discussion around other CBD products, and I completely respect your position, and the discussion around other CBD products is far more complex. Because it is being listed by the EFSA and has then been adopted by the EFSA, there are, and I'm not talking from my personal point of view, but that is contested in various areas. So the Cannabis Trade Association UK, EIHA are saying actually that decision is incorrect because there is history of consumption and in the way it's been manufactured and produced prior to 1997. It is now critical that we work as an industry to provide evidence of that, solid foundation evidence if we are going to contest that. And if we are going to contest that, we need to follow the correct procedures to do that. So a Section 4 submission, for example, which I know the CTA are doing, contesting that, is waiting for the appropriate authorities to make a decision on whether or not that is novel. And I'm going to end the novel thing reasonably quickly, because it can rage on, this argument will rage on for a long time. What we need now is a definitive decision within the UK, which is then enforced. What we currently don't have is an enforced decision. So we have a guideline that's been put in place and adopted in the UK, but actually that guideline isn't being enforced and hasn't been adopted wholly, and that's the whole reason our show is running. Once that guideline is put in place, whether it falls on one side or the other, then at least we will know exactly where we are as an industry. So, I encourage anybody to make sure that they press forward with that agenda and we try and get some type of decision for that, for the good and benefit of everybody.
And I guess the point there is really just that, it could well be that distillate could be proven not to be, and that would be great for everyone, and we crack on. Yeah. But for now, everything is likely novel, and that's the stance we take. But it could be that the EIHA, etc., can prove that distillate wouldn't be, and then great, then that wouldn't be in scope. But for now, we just assume that everything is.
But then you have to view that also from your industry perspective as your risk management of that particular situation.
Absolutely.
and that's entirely a sensible thing to do if I was in business at the level that you guys are.
Going through a novel food application, we would apply for our full range of products. So whether we include distillate or not doesn't really make a difference. We would go for getting all our bulk products novel food approved. And if they were, they could then go in consumer products and being an approved active, like an ingredient that could then go in, whether that's a distillate or an isolate.
I've got time for another couple of questions. Anybody else? Can I not encourage anyone? No? Well, Mile High have a stand. I think which direction's your stand in?
Over there
over in that direction there. So if you want to catch up with these two gentlemen at any point during the show and ask them any more questions on novel food or on setting high standards within the industry, they will both be available. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please put your hands together for Christian and Frederik Hendriksen from Mile High Labs. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you. Cheers.